chosen one. There is a moment that arrives quietly, not with applause, not with an announcement, but in the texture of a room when someone who never made space for you suddenly moves. You notice it before anyone says a word. The conversations shift. The energy adjusts. People who once spoke over you now weigh their words before offering them. People who once dismissed what you brought to the table now listen with a kind of attention they never gave you before. Something has changed, not in who you are that was always true, but in what has become visible. This message finds you in that moment, not at the beginning of your journey, but in its revelation when what was planted through years of being unseen is finally breaking through the surface. The appreciation surrounding you now is real. It arrived, and those of us who have been watching know exactly what it took to get here. But before you step fully into what this season is, there is something you need to understand about where it came from. Because the shift happening around you is not simply the world correcting a mistake. It is something older and deeper than social dynamics and delayed recognition. What people are beginning to see in you was not built when things got better. It was built when things were hardest. And understanding that changes everything about what this season is actually asking of you. The appreciation is real, but where it came from will determine what you do with it. This season didn't begin when they started noticing. It began in the silence before anyone was watching. You probably felt the first signs of the shift before it had a name. A conversation where someone who used to cut you off now waited for you to finish. A room where the atmosphere adjusted the moment you entered, not because anything was announced, but because something had changed in how people perceived the weight you carry. They didn't say it, they showed it, and you felt it before you could explain it. That feeling of something arriving that you've been waiting for without knowing exactly what it was is worth pausing for. Not to celebrate it yet, not to analyze it yet, but simply to acknowledge that it is real. The appreciation surrounding you now is not your imagination. It is not a coincidence. Something shifted, and the people around you are responding to something they may not be able to name, but cannot deny. What you're standing in right now is not the outcome of a single decision or a single season of discipline. It is the visible result of something that was growing long before it broke the surface. Think of the way a seed operates underground, invisible to everyone who walks above it, giving no indication of what is happening beneath the soil, but doing precisely the work it was designed to do in the darkness before the light. What is becoming visible around you now was growing that way. In the seasons no one was watching. In the months and years when the appreciation you're now receiving was nowhere in sight. The people who are treating you differently today are not simply wiser than they were. They are responding to something they can sense, even when they cannot articulate it. There is a weight to the way you carry yourself that wasn't built through good fortune or careful positioning. It was built through something that cost more than most people are willing to pay. Before this moment can be fully received, before you can stand in the appreciation surrounding you with the kind of clarity it deserves, something needs to be named. Something that happened in the long seasons before this one. Something it cost to get here. Because what people are now appreciating didn't come from a performance. It didn't come from finally being in the right room or finally having the right timing. It came from what was formed in you in the seasons you didn't choose, in the years that felt like they were pulling you under rather than preparing you to rise. The shift you feel right now is real, but it is not the whole story. It is not even the beginning of what this moment is asking of you. It is the first visible fruit of something that was planted in winter, and to understand what it means, you have to understand what the winter was actually doing. There is something you carried through those seasons that you may not have fully named. A specific kind of pain, the kind that comes not from failure, but from faithfulness. The kind that comes from being patient, from being generous, from being present and attentive and careful, and having all of that met with dismissal. With disregard. with the casual assumption that what you were offering was simply what you were obligated to give. That kind of experience marks a person, not on the surface, not in ways that show up on a face or in a posture, but deep in the structure of who someone is, in the way they read situations, in the way they know things before those things are said out loud, in the way they move through spaces where other people are still trying to find their footing. The people who are showing you appreciation now are responding to that mark. They may not know what they are responding to. They may simply feel that something in your presence demands a different kind of attention than you used to receive. But you know where it came from, and knowing where it came from is the beginning of knowing what to do with it. There is more to understand about what that season actually produced, and the understanding changes the meaning of everything happening around you right now. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that doesn't show on a person's face. It doesn't look like burnout. It doesn't announce itself as a crisis. It accumulates quietly in the space between what you offered and how it was received, in the hundreds of small moments when you extended something and had it treated as though it cost nothing, as though your presence and your patience and your grace were simply features of the environment rather than choices you were making about how to engage. You made those choices every single time, and the choice to stay steady, to stay open, to stay generous when everything around you was giving you reasons to do the opposite was not a passive response to your circumstances. It was an active decision made in full awareness of what was happening. You were not naive to the way you were being treated. You were choosing over and over again not to let what was happening to you determine how you responded to it. That is not softness. That is the most demanding kind of strength. Here is what the people around you did not understand, and what their misreading of you ultimately revealed about them. They looked at your restraint and assumed it meant you didn't have the capacity to react. They looked at your calm and concluded you hadn't noticed the way they were operating. They looked at your willingness to give benefit of the doubt and decided that meant the doubt was yours to carry indefinitely, that your generosity was a feature of your character that they could continue to draw from without any obligation to return. They were not misreading you by accident. They were comfortable misreading you, because a version of you that was manageable, that was available, that explained itself, that kept the peace was easier to be around than a version of you that had boundaries and standards and the capacity to hold them. And so they maintained the interpretation that suited them, and they kept it long past the point where the evidence should have forced them to revise it. What they were actually encountering was not softness. What they were encountering was discipline, the kind of discipline that looks like yielding to someone who doesn't know the difference between yielding and diminishment. You were yielding from a place of internal clarity, not from a place of confusion about your own worth. The yield was a choice, and they never recognized the difference. Every time someone pushed further, every time they tested the boundary slightly more, dismissed the contributions slightly more easily, assumed the access slightly more casually, something was being revealed. Not about you, about them. They were answering a question you hadn't known you were asking. Who actually sees what I'm offering? Who can be trusted with what I bring to this space? They answered. And the answer was information you couldn't have received any other way. There is a question that may have been sitting underneath all of this quiet, persistent returning in the moments between the exhaustion and the determination to keep going. Did my patience cost me something I cannot recover? Did I spend too many seasons staying where I should have left, extending grace to people who never intended to deserve it? Here is what needs to be said clearly about that question. Your patience did not cost you what you think it cost you. The grace you extended during those seasons was not wasted. It was working not on the people who were receiving it, because many of them were not changed by your generosity. It was working on you. Every time you chose restraint instead of reaction, you were developing the ability to operate from a deeper place than the immediate provocation. Every time you gave benefit of the doubt past the point where someone deserved it, You were learning something about the difference between charitable interpretation and willful blindness. Every time you stayed calm in a situation that deserved your full response, you were building the specific kind of internal stability that cannot be constructed in easy circumstances. The misreading was painful, that is true, and it deserves to be named as such. The grief of being patient and having it weaponized of being kind and watching that kindness treated as permission is real. It is not something to rush past or spiritualize away before it has been fully acknowledged. But the misreading was not final, and it was not neutral in what it produced. The people who mistook your mercy for permission were not simply wrong about your character, they were revealing their own. Every escalation was a data point. Every test of your restraint was a filter. And by the time the pattern had repeated itself enough times, you were not simply exhausted, you were informed. You knew with a specificity that no one can teach you the difference between someone who genuinely doesn't know how to receive grace gracefully and someone who has decided consciously or not that your grace is something they're entitled to. That knowledge earned through what it actually cost you is not a wound. It is one of the most valuable things the season produced. You did not become bitter. You became discerning. That distinction is the beginning of understanding what the seasons you walked through were actually building toward. There was a pattern. You may have noticed it the way the same sequence of events kept showing up in different settings with different people in situations that seemed entirely unrelated on the surface. You would be generous, attentive, reliable. You would give what you had to give without measuring it out, and then something would shift, a push would come, or a test or a withdrawal of what had been offered to you, and something in you would quietly recalibrate. Not loudly, not with announcements, just a gentle internal adjustment in what you were making available. And the response every time with remarkable consistency was that the people around you adjusted too. Not because you said anything, not because you explained yourself or set formal terms, but because your recalibration created a change in the environment that could be felt before it could be named. You probably didn't have language for what was happening. You may have thought you were simply tired or protecting yourself, or finally reaching a limit you should have reached earlier. What you were actually doing was something more structured than that, and it was happening before you consciously chose it. The discernment was forming, and the way it forms is not through study or intention. It forms through encounter, through repeated experience of the same test under different conditions until something in you knows not because you've decided it, but because you've lived it exactly what a situation is asking for and exactly what it is not. The pattern wasn't punishment, it was preparation. Think of it this way. Every person who tested you was giving you a piece of information about the difference between someone who engages with you authentically and someone who is negotiating with what you're willing to give. Every moment where you stayed generous past the point where the data said you should have recalibrated was teaching you the exact cost of overextending. Every moment where you pulled back and the environment scrambled was showing you the actual weight of what you had been carrying and demonstrating that the scrambling was not your problem to solve. You were not engineering these moments, but you were learning from them in a way that goes bone deep, the way only experience can teach. What does it look like when someone has spent years in this kind of classroom? It looks like the ability to read a room before anything has been said. It looks like knowing when you enter a conversation, whether the other person is seeking genuine connection or seeking access to something you have. It looks like being able to distinguish between a request made in good faith and a request designed to see how much you'll give before you notice the pattern. These are not intuitions that come from personality. They come from formation, from seasons of having to navigate without clear external instruction, where the only reliable compass was your own interior clarity. There is a real-life experience that many people who have walked through this kind of season recognize the moment you stopped a behavior you had always assumed was simply being polite, always answering immediately, always being available, always making it easy for people to have access to you, and realize that what you thought was courtesy had been functioning as emotional labor for systems that were not yours to maintain. The relief of that recognition arriving alongside the disorientation of it. Because if that was what it was, then the boundaries you eventually set were not a departure from who you were. They were the first, honest expression of who you were, without the buffer of perpetual accommodation. That recalibration, that quiet, undramatic decision to stop doing the labor of making it easy for people who weren't doing their part, was not a hardening. It was a clarification, and the response it produced from the people around you told you more than any direct conversation would have. When you stopped making the space easy, some people simply stayed adjusting their own behavior, meeting you with more care, showing you through their actions that they understood the relationship was meant to be reciprocal. Those people are significant. But when you stopped making the space easy, other people scrambled. They reached for you. They sent signals designed to draw you back into the previous dynamic. They did not offer accountability or adjustment. They offered access, the same kind of access they had always sought, just with more urgency and more apparent warmth. Both responses were instructive. Both were answering the same question about who had actually been present in the relationship and who had been present in the arrangement. The pattern repeated itself because you were not yet done learning everything it had to teach you, not because you were doing something wrong, not because you were attracting the wrong kind of people as some fundamental feature of your character. But because the classroom runs its course, it covers what it needs to cover, and the course had not finished. Every repeat was a deeper application of the same lesson, extending your ability to recognize the pattern in more subtle forms under less obvious conditions in relationships where the investment was higher and the stakes were greater. By the time the pattern finally completed its cycle, you were not simply tired of encountering it, you were equipped to recognize it in its earliest stages before it had fully expressed itself. That kind of recognition, early, accurate, not requiring drama to confirm what you already knew, is what people feel when they are in your presence now. They can sense that you see clearly without being shown. And that kind of clarity changes how people choose to engage with you. Something was growing underground, and it was growing in a direction you were not yet able to see. There is a particular quality to the seasons that happen in the dark, not darkness as a metaphor for difficulty in general, but the specific kind of season where the external environment offers no confirmation of what is happening internally, where the work you are doing cannot be seen or validated, where you are being asked to remain faithful to something that has no visible evidence of maturity, no measurable proof of progress, no audience to affirm that what you are investing is producing anything of value. You have been in that season, perhaps more than once, perhaps for longer than felt reasonable or fair. From the outside, those seasons look like very little. They look like a person waiting, holding, continuing to show up without receiving the kind of response that would justify continued showing up. And because they look like very little from the outside, the temptation inside them is to interpret them the same way, to conclude that if nothing visible is happening, then nothing is happening. But that conclusion is wrong, and the person standing in a season of appreciation right now is living proof of how wrong it is. What happens in a season of hiddenness is not primarily about what the person is doing, it is about what the season is doing in the person. The most significant formation that happens during sustained obscurity is not discipline, though discipline develops. It is not patience, though patience is required. The deepest formation is a change in what the person requires in order to operate. When external validation is consistently unavailable, something shifts. At first, the shift feels like loss, the loss of the feedback loop that told you whether you were doing the right things, making the right choices, moving in the right direction. The absence of confirmation is disorienting, and the disorientation is real. But in the disorientation, something is being rebuilt. The internal compass is recalibrating. The capacity to operate from inner knowledge rather than external signals is developing, not because the person chose to develop it, but because the season provided no alternative. By the time a person comes out of a long hidden season, they carry something that is genuinely difficult to manufacture through other means: the ability to remain steady when no one is watching, to make decisions that align with values rather than optics, to stay oriented towards something when everything around them is uncertain. These capacities feel natural to the person who has developed them, which is part of why they are so often invisible to the person who carries them. But they are not natural. They are formed. Ecclesiastes chapter 3 verse 1 says there is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. The hidden season you walked through was not an interruption of your timeline. It was your timeline, the specific season in which what you needed to carry what comes next was being built. And seasons do not skip their work. They complete it. The harvest is not early because the farmer wishes it were. It arrives when the growth is done. What changes in a person who waits through a season of hiddenness without becoming bitter? Not everything. Some things remain the same: the grief of having been overlooked, the residual wish that certain seasons had been shorter, the questions that still sit without full answers. Those things don't disappear, but alongside them, something else is present that was not there before: a quiet certainty about what matters and what doesn't. A clarity about what deserves your energy and what doesn't. A freedom from the need to have your worth confirmed by every environment you enter. These are not small things. These are the things that make a person reliable in situations that require steadiness, discerning in situations that require wisdom, effective in situations that require the specific kind of authority that cannot be borrowed or performed, only grown. The people around you who are now showing appreciation are not simply recognizing that you have changed. They are responding to something they feel in your presence that they cannot fully explain. They sense that you are not trying to convince them of anything, that you are not managing their perception of you, that you are simply there, grounded, present, not requiring a particular response from them in order to maintain your equilibrium. That quality was not there in the same way before the hidden seasons, not because you were less of a person before them, but because what they built in you had not yet been built. The season produced it. The obscurity was the condition that made the production possible. There is a specific question that arises in long seasons of hiddenness that is worth naming. Did the season make me more or less than I was before? Did it expand me or diminish me? The honest answer for many who have walked this path is that it did both in sequence. It diminished what was unnecessary. First, the reliance on approval, the need for continuous external confirmation, the performance of a version of yourself calibrated to what others expected. And in the space left by that diminishment, something that could not have grown otherwise began to grow. The cold did not kill the seed. It did what cold does to seeds planted for the right season. It separated what was essential from what was not, and let the essential go deep. What came through the hidden seasons with you is permanent in a way that what gets built in easy seasons is not. The appreciation arriving in your life right now is meeting the permanent version of what was formed. And permanent things carry a weight that temporary constructions never do. Something specific was built. The next part of this message names it. There is something that develops through long seasons of having to operate without external confirmation that is genuinely difficult to describe to someone who has not experienced it. It is not a skill exactly, not something you can study or practice in the conventional sense. It is more structural than that. It changes how you receive information. It changes what you notice before other people notice it. It changes the quality of your attention in ways that are real and operational, even when they are invisible to the people around you. The name for it is discernment, but that word often gets used in ways that make it sound like a gift, something given to certain people as a feature of their nature. What the hidden seasons produce is not a gift. It is something that was developed through a specific kind of pressure over a sustained period of time, in a context where having it wrong carried real consequences. It was built in you. Through the seasons we've been talking about, through the pattern of having to read situations accurately without external tools to confirm what you were reading. Here is what discernment actually looks like when it has been formed this way. You enter a conversation, and before anything substantive has been said, you have already registered whether the other person is genuinely seeking understanding or seeking a particular outcome from the interaction. You don't think this consciously. You simply know it the way you know the temperature of a room when you walk into it, not through analysis, but through a kind of structural awareness that is faster than deliberate thought. You cannot always explain how you know. You simply know. And over time, across enough situations, you learn that what you know in those moments is reliable. That capacity to read what is actually happening beneath what is being presented, to sense the real dynamic underneath the visible one, is what the long seasons of hiddenness produced in you. Not because you are uniquely gifted, but because the season demanded it. When external confirmation is unavailable, when the usual signposts are absent, when you cannot rely on the feedback of your environment to tell you whether you're oriented correctly, something internal has to develop in its place, and it does. But here is what is important to understand about the timing of what you are experiencing. Now, the discernment you developed in the hidden seasons is not a personal asset that belongs to you alone. It became visible in this season because it has reached a level of maturity that other people can feel without being able to name. This is why the appreciation around you is showing up in the way it is, not as admiration for something you achieved, but as a response to something they sense in your presence that they cannot quite articulate. When someone has spent a long season having to distinguish repeatedly between what a situation appeared to be and what it actually was, they develop a relationship with truth that is different from people who have been in more confirming environments. The relationship is not easier. In fact, the person with this kind of discernment often carries a particular loneliness because they see things that others aren't yet seeing. And there is no comfortable way to be ahead of the room on certain kinds of knowledge. But the relationship with truth that develops through those seasons is deep and stable in a way that cannot be shaken by the normal pressures that cause most people to revise what they see. People feel this. They don't have language for it, but they feel it. The person who will not be moved by what is untrue, who will not be drawn into a false version of events by social pressure or emotional manipulation, who simply keeps operating from what they actually see rather than from what they're being pressured to see. That person creates a kind of gravity that pulls others toward a steadier relationship with reality. That is what you have become through the seasons you walked through, not by intention, not by design, but by formation. There is a question worth sitting with here. How do you know the difference between discernment and simply becoming guarded, between the development of genuine clarity and the hardening that comes from repeated hurt? The distinction is real, and it matters because they can look similar from the outside. The difference shows up in what the discernment produces. Guardedness produces distance. It keeps people out as a default position, and it requires evidence of safety before any access is granted. Discernment produces something different. It allows genuine access to be given freely where the evidence supports it, while simply not extending access where the evidence doesn't. The person with discernment is not less open than they were before the hidden seasons. They are more accurately open where openness is warranted and appropriately selective where it is not. The appreciation reaching you now is coming in part from people who can feel the difference. They can sense that you are not guarded against them, you are present with them. Your selectivity is not a wall they have to climb. It is a quality of attention that makes the people you do give access to feel genuinely seen. That is not a small thing to offer someone, and it did not come cheaply. What was built through those seasons was not only the ability to see more clearly, it was the capacity to carry something that required that kind of clarity, something that required a person who had been through enough to not be destabilized by what comes with responsibility. There is a difference between being built through something and being built for something. The distinction is significant, and it changes the meaning of everything we have been talking about. Being built through something means the experience changed. You shaped your character, deepened your capacity, produced qualities in you that would not have been produced in easier circumstances. That is real, and it is significant. But it is still primarily personal. It is still the story of what happened to you and how it affected you. Being built for something means the experience was targeted. It means the formation you went through was not random suffering that happened to produce some usable byproducts. It means that what was developed in you through those seasons was developed specifically because something was coming that would require exactly what the seasons built. The formation was not incidental. It was preparatory. This is the frame that changes the entire meaning of the appreciation you are receiving now. Consider the specific qualities that developed through the seasons we have been talking about. The ability to carry vision without external confirmation. The ability to remain generous without becoming dependent on the generosity being returned. The ability to extend grace to people who cannot yet meet you where you are, without requiring that they see the full picture in order for you to continue functioning. The ability to maintain clarity under pressure. The ability to distinguish between what a situation appears to be and what it actually is. These are not simply survival capacities. They are not the marks of someone who endured something hard and came through it with scars and a harder exterior. These are the marks of someone who was being prepared for a level of engagement with the world that requires exactly these things and could not be prepared for it in any other way. The person who can carry vision without external confirmation can operate in environments where the vision is not yet visible to anyone else and can do so without being undone by the absence of confirmation. That is not common. That is necessary for anyone entrusted with something that has to be built before it can be seen. The person who can remain generous without becoming dependent on the generosity being returned can continue to offer what is needed, even when what is needed is not being reciprocated, and can do so without resentment poisoning the offering. That kind of generosity is what makes certain people indispensable in seasons of difficulty and reconstruction. The person who can maintain clarity under pressure, who can see what is actually happening when everyone around them is reacting to what appears to be happening, becomes a stabilizing force in environments where instability is the default. Not because they are unaffected by what is happening, but because their orientation doesn't depend on the environment remaining manageable. You were not developed this way because you happened to encounter difficult people and difficult seasons. You were developed this way because what you were being trusted with requires someone who has been through exactly what you went through. There is a story in the book of Genesis about a young man named Joseph who was sold by his brothers into slavery, falsely accused and imprisoned, and spent years in circumstances that appeared to be the end of everything he had been told about his future. And then when the formation was complete, not when he decided it was complete, but when it was actually complete, a door opened that required precisely the qualities that the slavery and the prison had built in him. His capacity to carry vision without confirmation developed in the pit. His ability to interpret truth in the midst of confusion developed in the prison. His capacity to remain generous toward people who had betrayed him developed in the long seasons of unchosen obscurity. The opportunity that finally came to him was not a reward for suffering. It was an assignment that required someone who had been through exactly that specific formation. The suffering was not the point. The formation was the point. The suffering was simply the environment in which the formation could not have happened any other way. This is the frame that changes how you receive what is happening around you now. The appreciation reaching you is the first external sign that something is visible which has been growing for a long time. But the appreciation is not the assignment. The appreciation is the announcement. What the people around you are beginning to see is the evidence that the formation has reached a level of completion that makes it legible to others. That legibility is meaningful, but what it is pointing toward is more meaningful still. The question that is opening in this season is not how to receive recognition gracefully, though that matters. The question is what the formation was designed to do now that it is complete, because what was built through those seasons was not built to be displayed. It was built to be given. It was built to carry something, to offer something, to be a stabilizing and orienting presence in environments that need exactly what was developed. The appreciation people are showing you is real, but its full meaning is not about you. It is the first visible fruit of something that was always meant to go beyond you. What that means for how you walk in the season that is opening, that is what needs to be understood next. Because the temptation of this season is as real as any temptation that came before it. Let's be honest about what you expected this season to feel like. You expected vindication, not the loud kind you are past the version of yourself that needed to make noise about it, but the quiet kind, the internal satisfaction of having been right about what was forming in you, confirmed at last by the way people are engaging with you now. The sense that the waiting was worth it, because here is the evidence. Here is the proof. Here is the appreciation that says what you were building during all those seasons when no one was watching was real and it was worth waiting for. That feeling is valid. You are not wrong to feel it. The appreciation surrounding you is real. And after everything those seasons cost you, receiving it is not a small thing. But here is what this moment is actually showing you, and this is the revelation that changes everything about what comes next. The people who are now showing appreciation for you are not simply wiser than they were. They have not simply caught up to what was always obvious. They are responding to something they cannot fully name, the specific gravity of a person who went through sustained formation and came out the other side with depth rather than bitterness, with clarity rather than cynicism, with the capacity to carry weight without collapsing under it. They are not appreciating your patience. They are not appreciating your silence. They are not appreciating the fact that you stayed when staying was hard. They are responding to the fruit of what all of that produced. They can sense, without being told, without you performing it for them, that there is a quality in how you move through the world that did not come from good fortune or careful positioning. It came from something they don't have language for but can feel clearly enough to respond to. What they are responding to is not who you were before the hard seasons. It is who you became through them, and that distinction is the revelation. Because if what people are appreciating is not your performance and not your patience, but the actual fruit of actual formation, then the recognition is not confirming what you did. It is confirming what was done in you. There is a significant difference between those two things. What you did was show up, stay present, stay faithful when faithfulness had no visible return. What was done in you is everything we have been talking about: the discernment, the depth, the capacity to carry something, the ability to see clearly without requiring the environment to confirm what you see. You did not produce those things by effort alone. They were produced in you in the intersection of your faithfulness and the specific conditions of the seasons you walked through. And what is now becoming visible was always going to become visible, because what God builds does not remain hidden past the point where it has completed its formation. This is what "it's about time" actually means. Not finally, after all this time, the world has caught up. But exactly now, at the precise moment the formation is complete, the fruit of it is becoming visible. The timing is not late, it is exact. It is the arrival of a season that had to wait for what it was going to require to be fully built in the person who was going to carry it. And here is the part that changes how you receive what is happening around you. What has become visible is not the destination, it is the signal. The appreciation is the announcement that what was built is now ready to carry something, and the something it was built to carry has nothing to do with being seen. It has to do with what you are now equipped to offer in terms of steadiness, discernment, depth, the capacity to remain oriented when everything is uncertain to the people and the situations that are coming. Being chosen is not about being elevated to a position above others. It is about being entrusted with a formation process that produces something particular and being given the responsibility to carry that something faithfully. What you were chosen for was not the recognition. What you were chosen for is what comes after the recognition. The recognition is simply the first external confirmation that the formation reached completion. What was built in the hidden seasons was never built to be displayed. It was built to be deployed. This means the most dangerous thing you can do in this season is treat it as the arrival you have been waiting for. Not because rest is wrong, or because receiving appreciation is wrong, but because the specific temptation of a season of recognition is to settle into it, to let the confirmation of what was built become the end point of what was built for. The fruit of the tree is not for the tree. The fruit of a tree is the first visible evidence that the tree has matured to the point where it has something to give. And what was grown through your formation, the depth, the clarity, the capacity to carry what most people cannot, was never grown for the purpose of being admired. It was grown because there are people and situations that need exactly what was developed in you. And those people and situations are what this season is opening toward. The appreciation is real. Receive it, but do not build your house on it. It was never meant to be a destination. It was meant to be an entrance. There is a temptation in this season that feels nothing like a temptation. It feels like rest. It feels like the relief of finally not having to hold everything together without acknowledgement. It feels like you have arrived somewhere after a long time of moving through territory that didn't confirm you were going in the right direction. And in a certain sense, you have arrived somewhere. The season has shifted. The formation is complete enough to be visible. The appreciation is real, and you have every right to receive it fully. But there is something specific that this season is asking you to be careful about. Not because the appreciation is dangerous, but because of what tends to happen in the space between receiving recognition and moving with what the recognition is signaling. The temptation is to spend this season managing the recognition rather than walking with what it announces. Here is what that looks like in practice. You find yourself wanting to show the people who doubted you everything they missed. Not loudly, you've moved past the version of yourself that needed to be loud about it, but quietly, carefully, in the way you present yourself, in the way you tell your story, in the conversations where you have an opportunity to say, "I was building this," when no one could see it. There is a version of this that is testimony, honest accounting of what the seasons produced. And there is a version of this that is vindication, using the recognition to make the case you've been building in your head for a long time against the people who didn't see it. Knowing the difference between those two things is itself a test of the discernment you developed. Another form of the temptation is simpler. You want to rest here longer than the season is asking you to rest. Not indefinitely, not permanently, just long enough for the weight of the hidden seasons to lift completely before you take the next step. You have been moving through difficulty for so long that the first clear space feels like the right place to stop, and the appreciation surrounding you makes it feel safe to stop, which is exactly what makes it a temptation rather than simply a reasonable pause. There is also a pattern from the hidden season that needs to be released, now one that served you then but will limit you in what is opening. During the seasons of obscurity, you became very careful about who you explained yourself to. You learned the hard way that clarity is not something you can give to someone who is not genuinely seeking it, and that trying to make people understand something they have decided not to understand is a form of energy expenditure that produces nothing. That pattern of protective restraint was wise. It was appropriate to the season that produced it. But in the season that is opening, a different posture is required. There are people who are genuinely ready to receive what was built, who have the context to understand it, the capacity to engage with it, the readiness to be in relationship with who you actually are, rather than who you were before the formation. And they need you to be available to them. Not available in the old sense, not open to anyone who asks, not giving access without discernment. But available in the sense of not being so calibrated to protection that you miss the people who are genuinely present for this season. Here are the patterns worth releasing as this new season begins. Stop waiting for the people who were absent during the hidden seasons to acknowledge what they missed before you move forward. Their acknowledgement would feel good, but it is not required for your next step. The formation that happened in those seasons was complete before anyone noticed. It does not need their certification now to carry you into what is coming. Stop rehearsing what could have been different, the replaying of past seasons, what would have changed if recognition had come sooner, how things might have gone differently if people had seen what was there earlier, takes energy that this new season needs for something more forward-facing. The past seasons did exactly what they were designed to do. They don't need to be retried. Stop explaining your journey to people who don't have the context for it. The tree doesn't owe anyone an accounting of how many winters it survived. Let the fruit speak. What was built is visible now in its effects. Not everyone needs the full history to receive what the formation produced. And begin this operating from the character formed in the hidden seasons rather than from the injury that the hidden seasons left. Both are present, but which one you run from determines what this season produces. The person who moves from their formation meets what is coming with the full depth of what was built. The person who moves from their injury spends this season in the same dynamics as the last one, just with better external circumstances. One more thing about this season. The people who are now showing appreciation may need something from you. Not your story, not your vindication, but your steadiness, your discernment, your capacity to carry weight without being destabilized by it. Whether that is within your family, your community, your work, your circle of influence, there are people in this season who need what was formed in you available to them, not displayed. Available. And whether it is available depends on how you choose to carry what this season has confirmed about you. The choice that this season is asking for is becoming clear, not as a crisis, not as an ultimatum, but as a quiet clarification of where the next step leads. The central question of this entire journey is ready to be answered, not as a consolation, not as a theology, as an account of what actually happened. Was everything you endured in the seasons of hiddenness, the being overlooked, the patience that went unrecognized, the restraint that was mistaken for weakness, the long silence in which you could not point to evidence that anything was being accomplished, was any of it purposeful? Was it building toward something, or was it simply hard in the way that things are sometimes hard, with nothing more to explain it than the randomness of difficult circumstances? Here is what the evidence of this season says: it was purposeful. It was building toward something. Not in a way that bypasses the real cost of those seasons, not in a way that pretends the grief of being overlooked was easily borne, but in a way that is now visible in the fruit that those seasons produced, and that other people are now responding to without being asked to. You did not become someone worthy of appreciation by enduring. Endurance alone doesn't produce what is now visible in you. What you became happened through the intersection of your faithfulness and what God was doing in you through every season you were in, including the ones that felt like burial. The formation was not incidental, it was specific, it was targeted, and it produced exactly what it was designed to produce. The people showing appreciation now are not late admirers who finally caught up. They are the first witnesses of something that has been growing for a long time. What they are responding to: the specific quality of your presence, the way you carry yourself, the steadiness that comes from having been through sustained formation without losing your orientation, that did not arrive recently. It was built season by season in the hiddenness while no one was watching. And you are no longer reading this season as the vindication you were owed. You are reading it as the signal of what comes next. That shift in how you hold this moment from vindication to signal is itself the clearest evidence of the discernment that was formed in you. You see this moment for what it actually is: not the answer to a long question, but the beginning of an answer to a much larger one. Being chosen is not about being placed above others. It is not a designation that separates you from the ordinary weight of human responsibility. It is an entrustment, the specific entrustment of a formation process, and the responsibility to carry what that process produced with humility, with faithfulness, with the understanding that what was built through the hidden seasons was not built for display but for deployment. What does deployment look like? It looks like taking the step you have been discerning but postponing. Not because more confirmation is needed. The formation has produced its confirmation in ways you can now see and feel. But because every next step after a long season of hiddenness feels larger than it is, because you have been so careful for so long that the openness of the new season feels almost disorienting. The step is smaller than the fear that surrounds it. And the formation you carry is more than sufficient for what the step requires. Stop waiting for the people who doubted you to acknowledge what they missed. That acknowledgement has no structural relationship to your ability to move forward. What was built is yours, regardless of whether they name it. Move. Stop operating from the injury of being overlooked when the formation from that same season is available to you. Both are real, but the formation is what the season was for. The injury is what the season cost. Choose which one guides you, knowing that the formation is what the season was building and the injury is what it was building you through. Establish one boundary clearly that protects what was formed. There is likely something, a dynamic, a relationship, a pattern of engagement that was fine during the season of formation, but that will deplete what is now needed for what is opening. The discernment you developed knows what it is. Trust it, and begin to offer what was built. Not as performance, not as proof of what you survived, but as the natural, unforced extension of what the formation produced. The steadiness that people are now responding to, let it be genuinely available to the people who need it. The clarity that developed through the hidden seasons, let it serve the situations that require it. The capacity to carry weight without being undone by it, let it carry what comes into this season without reservation. Chosen one. This is the moment the tree offers what it grew through winter to give. You are not standing at the end of a long wait. You are standing at the beginning of something that the endurance made possible. The appreciation surrounding you is real. The formation that produced it is permanent. And what the formation was preparing you to carry is already approaching. You did not come through those seasons to rest in their outcome. You came through them to use what they built. The seasons that felt like burial were never burial. They were planting. What God plants does not produce early or late. It produces exactly when the root system is deep enough to hold what the visibility will require. That timing was not an accident. This moment is not random. And what comes next is not beyond you. It is exactly what you were being formed for. Walk into it with humility, with gratitude, and with the full use of everything the hidden seasons built. The formation is complete. The season is open, and what was planted in winter is ready to bear fruit in its time. If something in this message confirmed what you have been quietly knowing, the sense that what you endured was not wasted, that the season you are entering is significant, that what was built in the hidden years is now ready to carry something real. Take a moment to name that in the comments, not as a formula but as a response to what was just received. And if this message found someone who needed it, consider sharing it with them. We keep going when we know we are not alone in the going.